Tonight, we begin in silence, not the silence of sleep, but of something older, the kind that lingers after ruins collapse, after voices fade, after the wind forgets the names it once carried. This is the hush of buried things, of lost knowledge, and stories hidden not by time, but by fear. Long ago, they say the earth was not ruled by kings, but by giants, not merely tall men, but beings born of a forbidden union, offspring of heaven and earth. The Nephilim. Their footsteps cracked the mountains, their hunger swallowed cities. And then they vanished, but not entirely. In 1947, among the limestone caves near Qumran, fragments of their tales surfaced once more, hidden beside the Dead Sea for over 2 millennia. The brittle remains of the Book of Giants whispered a secret the world had tried to forget. Scholars would compare it to the forbidden Book of Enoch, condemned by bishops and burned in councils. Buried after Athanasius's decree in 367 AD, but the desert kept it safe, waiting. Now, let the night carry you. Breathe slowly. Sink beneath the surface of your thoughts. Let your body rest as we step across the threshold of ancient time. You are safe here. Only stories walk with us now. Stories once feared, now gently retold. This is the forgotten story of the giants and those who dared to remember. Before we begin, take a moment to support this journey into ancient mysteries. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another hidden chapter. Comment below where you are watching from and what time it is where you are. Let us know. Do you believe the story of the giants has been forgotten or buried? And if you find this story as captivating as the title promises, share it with someone who needs a voice to fall asleep to tonight. Now close your eyes. The stars are waiting. The sand held its breath for centuries. In the hollow cliffs above the Dead Sea, in a land where time moves like wind over stone, something waited. It was not gold or jewels, but something far older, something fragile. When a young shepherd named Muhammad Dib climbed the rocks near Qumran in 1947, chasing a stray goat, he could not have known that his careless stone, tossed into a cave's mouth, would strike a jar that had not been touched in over 2,000 years. The sound of shattering clay echoed like a bell through the empty stillness, and what emerged from the cave would ripple through every sacred library in the world. Scrolls, dozens of them, some in pieces, some nearly whole, wrapped in linen and sealed in earthen jars. Scholars would call them the Dead Sea Scrolls. They would speak of Isaiah and the war scroll and the community rule. But among the brittle fragments from cave, one was something stranger, something darker. A tale of beings who were not quite angels, not quite men, and not at all welcome in the world they ruled. The Book of Giants. It was not a complete book, just torn slivers of parchment, names half visible, sentences broken by time. But even in fragments, it spoke of a world that trembled under the weight of divine rebellion. It told of watchers, the fallen angels who descended from heaven, and of their monstrous offspring, the Nephilim, who defied the order of creation. And buried between the lines was a name, Enoch, the one who walked with God, the scribe who wrote what others feared to read. In the time before the flood, before even the first temple stone was laid, there was Enoch. He did not rule, nor did he fight. He listened, he saw, he wrote. His voice carries through books long buried, through myths rebranded as fable, through whispers in lost languages. The Book of Giants, though scattered and incomplete, is a doorway into Enoch's memory, a memory the early church sought to forget. By the 4th century, the bishops of power had drawn a line between what was sacred and what was dangerous. The Book of Enoch, along with texts like the Apocalypse of Peter and the Gospel of Judas, were declared heretical, burned or buried, their wisdom outlawed. Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, issued his Easter letter in 367 AD, naming the 27 books now known as the New Testament and condemning the rest. Among the Apocrypha was Enoch's tale. The Book of Giants disappeared soon after, but silence is not the same as death. In the darkness of that cave, the ink still clung to the parchment. The names were still there: Mahueh, Gilgamesh, Oya, and Hahaya, giants cursed by the weight of their own dreams. Dreams of destruction, dreams of drowning, dreams of their end. These were the children of fallen angels, beings of great power and greater hunger. They towered over men and consumed what they pleased. They were not born, they were made, unnatural, unwhole, and afraid of what they had seen in their dreams. The Book of Giants is not only a record of power but of dread. It tells of the moment when the Nephilim, once proud and unchallenged, began to fear the future. Their dreams turned dark. They saw visions of a tree uprooted by a flood, of mountains crumbling beneath waves. They saw their names vanish from the earth, and in their fear, they turned to Enoch. It was Enoch who interpreted their dreams, Enoch who walked between heaven and earth. He traveled not by chariot, but by spirit. He entered the realm of angels and returned, bearing messages too heavy for most to carry. The giants, in their desperation, asked him to intercede, to speak on their behalf to the Most High. But judgment had already been sealed. One fragment of the Book of Giants, found among the scrolls, describes a moment of grief. The giants knew that they would be destroyed. There is no plea, no rebellion, just acceptance. Even they, who shook the mountains, could not escape the decree written in the stars. Yet Enoch did not turn away. He took their words, their fears, and brought them to the watchers, their fathers, the fallen ones bound in shame, and even the watchers, those proud angels who had descended for desire, wept when they heard what Enoch had seen. They begged for mercy, but heaven was quiet. This silence, more than the flood, was their true doom. The Book of Giants, though lost for centuries, echoes with this silence. It is not loud. It does not rage. It grieves. And in that grief is something deeply human, something that calls across time, across faiths and languages. A warning, yes, but also a lament. How strange it is that a handful of fragments, buried in the earth, could stir such deep waters in the soul. And yet, the more we read, the more we listen, the more we feel the weight of what was left behind. These giants, though monstrous, feared judgment. They dreamed of their end. And in those dreams, we see reflections of ourselves. We, too, dream. We, too, fear the flood. Close your eyes now, and let the cave open around you. Let the wind lift the dust of ancient parchment. Can you hear it, the crumbling edges of forgotten words? The soft voice of a scribe who never died. The stars above you once watched the Nephilim walk. Now they watch you rest. This is the beginning not of a story, but of a memory the world buried. But you have found it. They did not descend in rage, nor did they fall by force. They came by choice. In the days when the world was still young and the boundaries between heaven and earth were thin, there were those among the heavenly host who looked down and saw what should have remained unseen. They beheld the daughters of men, and in that beholding, something ancient shifted. Curiosity became desire, desire became decision, and upon the slopes of Mount Hermon, their pact was made. 200 angels, radiant and eternal, left their stations in the high places. Their leader was Shemihaza, bold and solemn. Around him gathered the watchers, beings of light who had been tasked to observe, to record, but never to interfere. They had guarded the thresholds of heaven, walked among the stars, and whispered to the winds. But now they desired to taste mortality. "We will descend," said Shemihaza, "and we will take wives from among the children of men." And when some hesitated, fearing the wrath of the Most High, he bound them with an oath. Together they swore upon the mountain that none would betray the others. The mountain itself trembled beneath their feet, bearing witness to their vow. Thus Mount Hermon became cursed, not by blood, but by decision. What began there would ripple through every kingdom on earth. They clothed themselves in form, shaping bodies of fire into the likeness of flesh. They walked among the valleys like kings. The people, seeing their beauty and brilliance, mistook them for gods, and the daughters of men, dazzled by their majesty, bore them children, giants. These were the Nephilim, and their birth shattered the natural order. They were vast, not merely in size, but in presence. When they moved, the earth noticed. When they spoke, men listened in awe and fear. They hunted not just beasts, but dominion, with minds gifted from angels and strength drawn from the wombs of women. They began to shape the world in their own image. The Book of Giants, in its fragmented testimony, names a few: Oya, Haya, Mahwe, and others, shadows of titanic memory. They were builders and warriors, rulers and tyrants. They drank the rivers dry. They tore down forests to make cities of stone. They carved the mountains and made their names echoes in the rock. Men followed them, not out of love, but out of terror and wonder. But heaven did not forget. It watched as these giants turned from power to pride, from dominion to desecration. They consumed everything: animals, men, even one another, and still their hunger grew. The watchers, now bound to the earth by their oath, could not contain what they had sired. Their glory turned to shame. What was once luminous became loathed. The children of men began to cry out. They cried not to the watchers, but beyond to the one who made the stars. And their cry was heard. The Most High looked upon the earth and saw that it was no longer good. The balance had broken. The firmament trembled. A reckoning would come. But judgment does not arrive without warning. Before the flood, before the chains, there was still a space, a pause, a moment in which choice might still be turned. It was in this moment that Enoch returned, the scribe, the seer, the man who walked with God, came down from the heights to see what had become of earth. What he found was a world heavy with sorrow and steeped in ruin. The giants, sensing something beyond their grasp, turned to Enoch. They feared the dreams that haunted their sleep, dreams of trees uprooted, of mountains drowned, of fire in the sky. They feared not death, for they had never known it. They feared erasure, to be forgotten, to vanish without trace. Their pride could not withstand the silence that followed judgment, and so they asked Enoch to speak. He did not refuse them. Though their fathers had defied heaven, though their deeds had stained the soil, Enoch still listened. For even among monsters, there remained the echo of fear, the cry of the lost. He took their dreams and their grief and began his ascent. The watchers watched him rise. Enoch moved between worlds, not with wings, but with words. He entered the realm where stars sing and thrones burn with purpose. There, he stood before the Ancient of Days. There, he pleaded, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. And there, he received the answer. The watchers would be bound, the giants would fall, the flood would come, the earth would be made new. When Enoch returned, his face bore the silence of heaven. The watchers knew then that their time had ended. Some raged, others wept, but none could change what had been written. Their children, the Nephilim, would soon be no more. Shemihazar, once bold and burning, turned his face to the dust. The mountain that bore their oath stood still, waiting for the winds to erase their names. The Book of Giants captures this quiet unraveling. It is not the tale of a war, but of a slow collapse, of power undone not by swords, but by consequence. The watchers did not die. They were made to wait, bound beneath the earth, beneath the stars, beneath time. And their children, born of forbidden union, became nothing more than dreams. But dreams have power. Even now, as you listen, you may feel them stirring, not with fear, but with understanding. For every soul knows the cost of rebellion. Every heart carries some echo of pride, of longing, of sorrow. The giants lived loudly, but they ended quietly, and their story, forgotten by the world, has returned to your ears. Not to frighten you, but to remind you, what is buried is not always gone. Now rest. Let the memory settle like ash across your mind. Let the mountain fade into mist. The stars above are watching still, and the next chapter waits, gentle and unbroken, just beyond the veil. It began in twilight, not the kind marked by the sun's descent, but a deeper twilight, one that settles over the soul when what was once pure becomes clouded. When the watchers, those heavenly beings of great beauty and power, took wives from among the daughters of men, the world held its breath. What could such a union bring forth? What might emerge from the mingling of light and dust? The answer came swiftly. The children born of that union were not like other children. They were tall, too tall, strong, too strong. Their eyes shone with fire. Their voices thundered like distant storms. They learned to speak not only with words, but with will. Their very presence bent the world around them. These were the Nephilim. At first, they were seen as miracles. Villagers bowed before them. Mothers wept to hold them. Kings offered tribute, hoping to earn favor from the sons of gods. The Nephilim walked among men like demigods, giants whose hands built towers that kissed the clouds and whose steps shook the valleys. They were called many names: Watchers' sons, Mighty Ones, the Fallen Lords. In the Book of Giants, we hear whispers of their names: Mahue the Traveler, Oya the Dreamer, Hahia, his brother, and others whose stories were lost in the tearing of time. They learned swiftly, for knowledge flowed through their veins. The Watchers taught them all the secrets of heaven: how to make weapons from metal, how to enchant with herbs, how to read the stars and bend the earth. They were not born into ignorance. They were born into dominion. But dominion without wisdom becomes destruction. As the Nephilim grew, So too did their appetites. No longer satisfied with the worship of men, they demanded offerings. Where once they taught, now they took. They hunted the beasts of the field, and when beasts were scarce, they hunted men. They drank the rivers dry, scorched the forests for sport, and built monuments not to the heavens, but to themselves. The world, once green and balanced, began to crack beneath their weight. Animals fled the plains. The skies grew quiet. Where the Nephilim ruled, silence followed, not the silence of peace, but of fear. Cities once filled with song now echoed with dread. The sons of men began to speak in hushed tones. Some fled to the mountains. Others begged the watchers to stop their children. But the watchers, once proud, now stood helpless. What they had created, they could no longer control. The Book of Giants speaks of this moment with strange sorrow. The giants, it says, began to dream, not of glory or conquest, but of endings. Oya and Hahya, the twin sons of Shemihaza, dreamed of trees torn from their roots, of stones falling from the sky, of a flood so great it swallowed the world. In these dreams, they saw themselves vanishing, forgotten, erased. They were not just strong, they were terrified. They turned to Enoch, the one who could walk between realms, the one who still listened. They told him their dreams, begged him for interpretation. Enoch, ever faithful, took their words and wrote them down. Each dream etched with care into what would become the lost Book of Giants. He did not mock their fear. He did not curse their fathers. He only listened. And then, he warned, the flood was coming. But even in that warning, there was something tender. Enoch saw them not only as destroyers, but as children who had been born into brokenness. They had never known limitation, never known humility. What they had been given, and what they would lose completely. The Nephilim began to change. Some grew violent, desperate to defy the fate that had been spoken. Others grew silent, withdrawn, haunted by visions of water and ruin. Maui, it is said, flew across the earth on the wings of a creature not named, seeking answers. He rose to the heavens and descended into the deep. But there was no escape. Every dream returned to the same end. Their names erased, their cities drowned, their memory reduced to whispers in forgotten scrolls. What makes this story so strange, so human, is that even the giants, those monstrous children of heaven and earth, longed to be remembered, not for their hunger, or their power, or their terror, but for existing, for having walked beneath the sun, for being, but the earth could no longer bear them. It cried out, and the cry reached the heavens. What began as miracle became monstrosity, and what had been exalted now awaited the flood. As you breathe gently, resting here with this story, know this: even the most powerful beings feared being forgotten. Even the loudest giants were silenced by their dreams. And even the most forbidden stories find their way back to the light. The Book of Giants did not survive in full. Its pages were torn, its words scattered, its meaning buried. But enough remained, enough to remind us that pride has a price, that power without mercy consumes itself, and that even those cast as villains once trembled at the edge of the unknown. Close your eyes now. Let the names of giants drift through your thoughts like smoke. Let the ruins of their cities fade into mist. The stars overhead still remember. And soon, the waters will rise. But not yet. For now, Rest. The next part of the story is waiting, just beyond the veil. They slept uneasily. For all their strength and splendor, the Nephilim could not escape the night. Their bodies, carved with muscle and might, lay heavy beneath the stars. But their minds wandered, and what they saw in the darkness was not conquest. It was loss. It was silence. It was the end. The Book of Giants, preserved only in fragments, begins to tremble with sorrow here. It speaks of dreams that came to the children of the Watchers, giants who once ruled like gods, now huddled in their fear. The dreams came not once, but often. They did not whisper. They screamed, and each time, the vision returned like a shadow that refused to be chased away. Oya and Hahia, twin sons of Shemihaza, were among the first to speak of it. In their sleep, they saw a great tablet, inscribed with the names of the giants. A heavenly messenger descended, and with one stroke of fire, the names were wiped away. The tablet cracked, the dust rose, and all that had been written was lost. When they awoke, they could not speak for hours, not from pride, but from dread. Others dreamed too. Mahwe, the boldest among them, saw a forest engulfed in flood. Trees tore from their roots, mountains bowed like reeds, and beasts of the land and air drowned with open mouths. He rose from his bed, heart pounding like war drums, and flew on wings crafted not by nature but by knowledge forbidden. He sought answers among the stars, but the heavens were quiet. Again and again, the giants were plagued by visions, a stone tower cracking in a rainstorm, a fire that consumed without heat, an angel with eyes like thunder, descending with chains in his hands. Even those who had once laughed at death now trembled in their halls. And always, at the center of the dream, was a flood. They did not know what a flood was. There had never been one. Rain fell in gentle mists. Rivers ran peacefully through valleys. Oceans kept their place. But in the dreams, water became a wall. It moved with purpose. It swallowed cities. It erased history. And in that erasure, the Nephilim saw themselves names unspoken, deeds undone. They turned to Enoch. Again, the scribe of heaven had once walked among them. He had listened when no one else would. He had taken their dreams to the throne of the Most High and returned with silence heavier than thunder. Now, in their terror, they called for him once more. And Enoch came. He stood at the edge of their gatherings, unafraid. His form was not radiant like the Watchers, nor towering like the Nephilim, but there was something about him, something unshakable. His eyes held the weight of the stars. His voice did not tremble. He listened, one by one. The giants came to him. Mahwe recounted his flight beyond the clouds. Oya and Hahia told of their shattered tablet. Others spoke of death, of angels, of waves, and Enoch, with ink made from ash and scrolls wrapped in silence, wrote each word. Then, when all was spoken, he closed his eyes, and he saw the dreams were not madness. They were warnings, not from fear, but from heaven. The Most High had seen the corruption spread like rot across the earth. The Watchers had broken the order. Their children had devoured peace. The balance of creation trembled, and the flood would be the answer. But it was not just water. It was judgment wrapped in mercy, a cleansing, not a curse. When Enoch opened his eyes, the giants watched him in stillness. They wanted hope, a path of escape. Some begged him to intercede again, to plead for their lives, their legacy. to rewrite what the stars had written, but Enoch did not speak promises. He only said, "Prepare." This was not cruelty, it was truth. For even in their origin unholy, unnatural, there remained a spark of yearning in the Nephilim, a desire not only to live, but to matter. And perhaps that is why the dreams came, not to torment them, but to invite them to see what they had become, and what would follow if they did not turn. But it was too late. The Watchers, their fathers, had already been sentenced, bound in the caverns of the earth, their cries unheard. The sons they left behind would inherit their doom. In the fragments of the Book of Giants, there is a line. Then a voice was heard in the night, saying, "Your names shall vanish from the earth, and none shall remember you." But that was not entirely true. For even in the crumbling of scrolls, in the silence of centuries, someone remembered, someone wrote, someone preserved. You. Now, as you rest with this story, feel the dreams not as fear, but as warning. They are echoes, reminders, that pride breaks mountains, that mercy waits for none, that even the giants, those terrible children of angels, knew what it was to weep in the dark. Let your breath slow, let your mind settle. The waters are still far off, the stars still shine, and the scribe still walks between heaven and earth. And so we turn the page, gently, into the next memory. He did not come with fire. He did not ride chariots of thunder or carry scrolls bound in gold. Enoch walked softly barefoot across scorched stones, clothed in linen that clung to the dust. And wherever he went, silence followed, not the silence of fear, but of listening, for even the earth itself seemed to lean in when he spoke. Enoch, seventh from Adam, the man who walked with God and was not, was more than prophet. He was a bridge between flesh and spirit, between sky and soil. His task was not to rule or destroy, but to remember. He carried memory like oil in a lamp, steady, flickering, sacred. And now, as the giants turned in restless dread, it was to him they looked once more. The world he entered was no longer the world of his youth, where once there had been meadows and flocks. Now, there were pillars of stone, carved with names that glowed in the moonlight. Cities stood where forests once sang. Towers reached upward, not in praise, but in challenge. The Nephilim had shaped the world to reflect themselves. Monuments to pride, thrones upon thrones, temples not to the Creator, but to the created. Enoch passed through their cities like a shadow. He asked for no welcome. He needed no invitation. The Watchers, now in hiding, sensed his coming but did not show their faces. Bound by their sentence, they waited for the end. Their children, towering and furious, watched Enoch with strange reverence. Here was one who had never struck a man, and yet walked unshaken through halls carved from fear. He came not to condemn, but to see, and what he saw filled his heart with sorrow. The Nephilim had forgotten the songs of the stars. They had buried the wisdom of the wind. They consumed without thanks, ruled without mercy, and dreamed only of their own permanence. But beneath their might, Enoch saw something else, a flicker, the faint echo of longing, not for power, for peace. He listened to their dreams again, each more broken than the last. Trees falling, oceans roaring, names erased from tablets of fire, and the same question in every voice, will we be forgotten? Enoch did not answer, not at first. Instead, he wrote. He took his reed pen and dipped it into ink blacker than night. Onto skins of parchment he traced the dreams, the cries, the visions, every name, every plea, every broken whisper was recorded. This would become the Book of Giants, not a book of triumph, but of trembling, not a celebration, but a lament. Then he began to speak, not to men, not to giants, but to the earth itself. In one valley, he knelt by a river and whispered to the waters. In another, he laid his hands upon stone and called forth memory. He wrote not just for the watchers, but for what was coming, a generation unborn, a world that would rise after the flood, a people who would walk the ruins and wonder what had been. And so he walked, through crumbled fields and hollow halls, through gardens overgrown and markets now silent. He walked among shadows not to fear them, but to remember what light had once been. In one ruined city, he found a giant alone, Ohia, son of Shemi-Hazar, sitting beneath a tree that bore no fruit. His arms rested on his knees. His eyes were lost to the horizon. When he saw Enoch, he did not rise. He only asked, "Will the water come soon?" And Enoch said, "Yes." Ohia nodded once. "Then let it be clean." That night, the stars seemed brighter. The Book of Giants tells us little about Enoch's emotions, but we can imagine the weight he bore, the sorrow of recording doom, the ache of knowing the flood must come. But deeper still was his hope, that some word, some sentence, some dream might survive, because buried in every judgment is mercy. Enoch did not walk forever. One night, he vanished, not in fire, not in fury. He was simply not. Taken, caught up beyond the veil, beyond the reckoning, but his words remained. The watchers had no more to say. The giants returned to their towers. The wind grew still, and the sky, for a time, was quiet. Now close your eyes. Imagine the dust of those ancient streets, the whisper of Enoch's robes across marble, the scratch of ink upon parchment. Can you hear it, his voice, low and steady, telling you the truth no one else dared to say? This is not the end, only the turning of a page. It was never meant for kings, not for warriors or priests or those who walked proudly in the sunlight. The Book of Remembrance, the sacred record written by Enoch, was crafted in silence, in hidden places, for the forgotten, for those who would not live to see redemption, for those whose names would fall from memory like leaves from a dying tree. When Enoch vanished, he left behind not monuments, but manuscripts, ink pressed into prepared skins, etched with care. Not one line boasted, not one sentence pleaded. These were not books for judgment, but for bearing witness, and among them, deep in the scrolls, now fragmented and scattered, was the sorrow song of the giants. This was the Book of Giants. What remains of it in our age is only dust and echo. A few scraps found in the caves of Qumran written in Aramaic, barely legible, like footprints fading beneath wind-blown sand. And yet what little we have is powerful. In it are the names of giants once feared across the world, their dreams, their grief, their desperate conversations with the man who walked between heaven and earth. But deeper still is what the book represents. Remembrance. It is one thing to punish, another to forget. The flood that was coming would wash away towers and bloodlines, monuments and memories. It would purify the earth. But even in judgment, the Most High made room for memory. The giants would not be saved, but neither would they be erased without record. Their story twisted, tragic, human, was written in the ink of mercy. Enoch wrote it. He did not glorify them. He did not pity them. He simply recorded what was true, that they had been born from rebellion, that they had devoured the world, that they had dreamed of their end, and that even in terror they turned to a prophet, hoping to be heard. He wrote not only their names, Mahweh, Oya, Hahya, but their longings, their visions, their final silences. The parchment bore their tremors like veins across the skin of history. And when he had written all he could, Enoch hid the books, not in plain sight, not among kings, but in sacred earth, guarded by time and flame. There are those who say the Book of Remembrance was carried by angels to a place beyond reach. Others claim it sleeps still beneath the sands near the ruins of Babylon or is hidden in a chamber beneath the Mount of Olives. The Zohar, a later mystical text, would speak of the Or Haganuz, the hidden light concealed until the end of days. Perhaps Enoch's writings are part of that concealed flame, not lost, merely waiting. When the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in 1947, among them were fragments of these ancient voices. The Book of Giants re-emerged, not as myth, but as memory. Scholars puzzled over it. The church remained quiet, and the desert whispered, "I did not forget," in one fragment. Oya sees a tree with 3 roots. A voice tells him the tree will be pulled up, and none will remain. Another speaks of a tablet written by the Holy Watcher, declaring the end. These are not tales of conquest. They are records of reckoning. And in their quiet grief lies a reflection of our own fears, that we too will be forgotten, that we too have wandered too far. But Enoch wrote, so we would remember. The Book of Remembrance is not just about the past. It speaks now. It tells us that memory is sacred, that every action echoes, that even the proudest can fall, and that even the fallen can be named with dignity. Tonight, as you lie beneath the sky, let this truth sink into your breath. You are remembered. Your story matters. Your fears are seen. The one who counted the names of giants also counts the hairs upon your head. Let the wind pass through the reeds. Let the parchment unroll once more. You are reading with the eyes of angels. You are listening through the ears of prophets. The book is not finished. It waits for every soul who dares to remember. Now rest. Let the dreams come. They will not harm you, for the flood has not arrived. The pen is still in hand, and the next line, soft and golden, is waiting to be written. They had once stood at the edge of eternity, the Watchers, those radiant beings who circled the thrones of heaven, were made of flame and silence, charged with seeing but never touching. Their eyes beheld the birth of stars and the slow blooming of galaxies. Their voices were reserved for songs that never reached mortal ears. And yet, they looked down into the valleys of earth, down into the waters where the moonlight danced, down into the eyes of human women, and in their looking, something awakened. Not love, not lust, but longing, the kind that pulls even angels from the sky. 200 of them fell, not by force, but by choice, led by Shemi-Hazar. They bound themselves with an oath atop Mount Hermon. That mountain still remembers. Its bones hum with a curse unbroken, for on its peak, the Watchers promised to descend together and take wives from among the daughters of men. And so they did. They clothed themselves in flesh and stepped across the veil. They had thought it would be beauty. They had hoped for communion. But what they created was corruption. The children of their unions, the Nephilim, grew into giants, fierce and ravenous, The Watchers had shared forbidden wisdom with mankind, how to fashion swords from ore, how to mix herbs for enchantment, how to read the language of the stars. They passed down secrets never meant for Earth, and the Earth recoiled. What had once been green turned to grey. The rivers ran red. Men bowed not in worship, but in fear. And the Watchers, once luminous, became shadows. They hid among the high rocks, cloaked in guilt. They watched their sons devour the peace of the world, and they wept. The Book of Giants, though shattered in form, holds one thread with painful clarity. The Watchers begged. They sent messages through Enoch. They asked him to carry their prayers to heaven. "Speak for us," they said. "Plead with the Most High." Enoch listened. He climbed the path between worlds, as only he could, and when he returned, the Watchers gathered like wind-blown leaves, trembling. What he told them was not cruelty, it was truth. Judgment had already been pronounced. The Most High had seen the violence, heard the cries of the innocent, watched the pride grow into plague. The Watchers would not be heard. Their voices had become thunder without rain. Their petitions would rise no higher. And the giants, their fate was sealed. Enoch did not scream it. He whispered it. And in that whisper, the Watchers collapsed. The fragments say they covered themselves in dust, that they struck their chests and howled, not with anger but with grief, for angels, whose voices once shook the pillars of heaven, now wept like orphaned children. They remembered what they had lost, not power, not place, but presence. They had walked with God. Now they would never rise again. One by one, they were taken bound by chains not made by human hands. Raphael, the archangel, descended like lightning. He seized Azazel, the great corrupter, and cast him into a pit in the desert, a place called Dudael. There he would remain until the final day. The others were buried beneath mountains, their names swallowed by stone. Only the wind remembers where they lie. And yet, in the grief of the Watchers, there is a mirror, a reflection of every soul that has strayed. They were not demons, not yet. They were mourners, regretful, broken, still luminous in places they had forgotten. The Book of Giants does not mock them. It records them. It honors their fall with silence and ash. We all fall. The question is, do we weep? Tonight, as you lie in stillness, imagine their tears falling like fire upon the rocks. Imagine the tremble of a voice once divine, asking only to be seen again. There is no wrath here, only sorrow, the kind that echoes forever in the space between what was and what might have been. The Watchers are still bound. The chains are still cold. But their story is not gone. You remember, and that is enough. Let your breath deepen. Let the stars keep watch above your sleep. The sky has not closed. The next chapter waits, soft as a wingbeat, just beyond the veil. There comes a point when a man no longer walks upon the earth but is drawn upward, called not by death, but by purpose. Enoch was such a man. He did not seek the throne of heaven. He did not hunger for glory. He simply listened first to the earth, then to the voices beyond it. And when the time came, he rose. He had already passed between worlds many times. Angels knew his name. The Watchers feared his silence. The giants clung to his every word. But this journey would be different. This was not a descent into dreams or a passing whisper through the veil. This was an invitation, a summons. The Most High had called. The Book of Enoch tells us that he walked with God, and then was not, for God took him, but hidden within other texts. mirrored subtly in the Book of Giants, is the deeper truth. Enoch ascended, alive, whole, lifted beyond the stars. He was not taken in sleep, but in light, in presence, in fire. The journey was not instant. He passed through 7 heavens, each more radiant than the last. The first shimmered with the song of birds and the laughter of rivers. The second bore the faces of watchers who had not fallen, those who still sang the sacred names. The third was a realm of flame, not of torment, but of purification. And still he rose. In the fourth, he saw the movements of the sun and moon, great wheels of light turning like living clocks. In the fifth, angels recorded every breath of man in books made of starlight. In the sixth, the thrones and dominions gathered vast and still, crowned with wisdom beyond time. But it was the seventh that broke him. There, the Ancient of Days waited. The throne was not carved. It was formed from will, from eternity, from essence. Around it burned rivers of fire, coursing with judgment and mercy. Lightning did not strike here. It stood still, bowing. 1,000 voices sang, and yet no sound filled the air. Only stillness. Enoch did not speak. He could not. His words had served him on earth. But here, silence was truer than speech. He bowed, not from fear, but from reverence. He was a man of dust and breath, standing before the one who had made breath itself. And yet, he was welcomed. The Most High, in his unsearchable will, received Enoch not as a servant, but as a friend, a scribe, a witness, a keeper of secrets. It was here that Enoch was shown the fullness of what was to come. He saw the flood, its rising waves like glass, swallowing cities. He saw the end of the watchers, their chains deep in the earth. He saw the Nephilim's names written in flame, then gently erased. And he saw something more. Hope. He saw that after the flood, there would be peace, that mercy would rise from ruin, that one day, the Son of Man would walk upon the earth, that healing would flow where once giants ruled, and that his words, his books, would not be lost forever. He was given a scroll, sealed and glowing. "Write what you see," said the voice that shook creation. "But seal what must wait." He obeyed. The Book of Giants, the Book of Watchers, the visions of the righteous, all were written with hands no longer mortal. And when his task was finished, Enoch was not sent back. He was changed. He became Metatron. Some say a prince among angels, the voice behind the veil. Others believe he remains as he was, watching, waiting, writing still. But all agree, he did not die. He ascended, and from above, he sees. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy and the weight of the world drifts from your chest, imagine Enoch rising through layers of starlight, not in pain, not in pride, but in peace, a man of earth carried by light, bearing witness for generations yet unborn. You, his voice, once etched on crumbling scrolls, now echoes in your breath. You are not forgotten. The heavens are not closed. The books have not all burned. Some still remain. Let your thoughts drift upward, through fire, through song, through stillness. Let the presence of peace wrap around you. The journey is not over. The pages turn still. And Enoch walks where memory meets eternity. Heaven does not rush to judgment. It watches. It waits. It listens as voices rise like smoke from the earth, as deeds unfold beneath the stars. But when the time for mercy passes, when the scales no longer hold balance. A decree is written, not in wrath but in righteousness. And so it was that the sentence fell. Enoch, having ascended into the chambers of fire and silence, stood before the throne of the Most High. Behind him trailed the echoes of the watcher's pleas, the Nephilim's dreams, the cries of the broken earth. He did not ask for favor. He did not weep. He only stood as witness. And the voice that answered was not loud, it did not need to be. This sin shall not go unspoken. It was not only the defilement of earth that called for judgment. It was the corruption of order, the breach of boundaries, the gift of knowledge twisted into weapons, the seed of heaven planted without blessing. The watchers had crossed a line older than creation itself, and their children, the Nephilim, had poured ruin upon the soil. The judgment came in 3 parts. First, the watchers would be bound, each one by name, each one by angelic hand. Their brightness would be sealed in darkness. No death would touch them. Instead, they would wait for the final day, when even the stars would be weighed. Second, the Nephilim would be destroyed, not by sword or fire, but by water. A flood, deep and total, would rise from the fountains of the great deep. It would not come from heaven alone, but from within the earth itself. The very world they had bruised would rise to wash them away. Third, their memory would be buried. The cities they built would crumble into dust. Their names would fall silent. Their monuments would be swallowed by root and wind. Only those who sought truth in silence would remember. This was the sentence. It was not spoken in hatred. It was delivered like the setting of the sun, inevitable, solemn, perfect in timing. Heaven did not rejoice. The angels wept. Even Raphael, who would bind Azazel, hesitated before stretching out his hand. The punishment was heavy, but the crime had long weighed heavier. The Book of Giants records that when the sentence was revealed to the watchers, they trembled. Shemihaza, their leader, who once burned with certainty, fell silent. His wings folded around him like grave shrouds. Azazel raged and spat and tried to flee, but it is said that Michael himself caught him, and the desert cracked where his body struck the earth. Dudael, the place of confinement, was a hollow land of sharp stones and searing fire. There, Azazel was buried, chained hand and foot, his face covered, and over him was placed rough rock, that the sun might not shine upon him again. One by one, the others were taken. Semiezer, Tamil, Ramiel, Kokabiel, once revered, now confined, not destroyed, but sealed. For even in punishment, there was purpose. They would remain as reminders, as pillars of warning. And the Nephilim, their doom was already rising. Though still alive, their spirits began to unravel. Dreams became nightmares. Their strength turned to madness. They began to turn on one another, brother devouring brother, friend striking friend. The weight of heaven's decree pressed down upon their hearts like mountains. No walls could hold it back. No tower could stand against it. Even the giants could feel the tide coming. The earth grew restless. Birds flew without nesting. Beasts howled and then vanished. The rivers swelled in silence. And men, those few who still remembered the old songs, began to look skyward with eyes full of knowing. Enoch, carrying the sentence back from heaven, wrote it plainly for all to read. The giants shall fall, their breath shall end, their names shall perish. Yet he added something else, a line few remember, but one shall be spared. One man, one family, not because they were strong, not because they were clever, but because they were faithful. In a world of violence, they had walked in quietness. Their hands had not built towers. Their lips had not praised the fallen ones, and their hearts had stayed soft. That man's name was Noah, but his story had not yet begun. For now, the sentence stood like stone across the sky, final, unmovable, and still. The watchers wept. They did not fight their captors. They bowed their heads, wings broken by guilt. They had tasted freedom. Now they would taste silence. Tonight, as you breathe slowly, let this truth settle in your chest. Even heaven weeps when judgment falls. The sentence was not a roar, but a sigh, a necessary stillness. And though destruction loomed, there was still a thread of light weaving through the night. You are not forgotten. The scroll is not closed. There are more pages to turn. It began as a sound too soft for ears. The wind shifted. The roots strained. The rivers spoke in a tongue the giants had forgotten. Long before the flood came, before the skies broke open and the fountains of the deep unleashed their sorrow, the earth began to cry. It was not a cry of pain. It was lament. The Nephilim had roamed the world with unchecked hunger. With their vast limbs they crushed the vineyards. With their sharpened knowledge they tore apart the balance of seasons. They burned the fields that once fed villages. They sucked dry the wells that once sang to thirsty mouths. The earth, bruised and hollowed, began to mourn. The Book of Giants hints at it, how creation itself recoiled from them. Animals grew scarce. Trees bore no fruit. The sky darkened not with storm, but with silence. Even time seemed to stutter. What had once flowed in rhythm now fell into jagged steps. The giants, in their confusion, grew more violent. They blamed the silence. They hunted what still lived. Beasts were devoured. Flocks stolen. Men torn from their homes to feed the growing void inside them. They were not only tall, they were empty. And in that emptiness, they howled. But the earth would not answer them. It had already begun to whisper to another. Lamech, son of Methuselah, lived far from the cities of stone. His household was quiet, his fields modest. One day, his wife bore a son. When he looked upon the child's face, Lamech trembled, for the boy's skin was radiant, his eyes clear as morning, and his voice soft as breath. He feared the child was not his. Lamech went to his father, Methuselah, and Methuselah, full of fear and wonder, went to Enoch. For though Enoch had ascended, the righteous still saw him in dreams, heard him in the hush between words. In a vision, Enoch answered, "This child is of man and of God. He shall be called Noah." It was the first time the name had been spoken. Noah, rest, comfort. The earth, groaning beneath the weight of the Nephilim, had been heard. And in response, heaven had planted a seed. But while Noah grew in obscurity, the earth's cry grew louder. The animals sensed it first. Birds no longer nested. Wolves abandoned their dens. The sea creatures vanished from the shores. Even insects left the crops untouched. It was as if all creation had turned its face from the giants. The world, once a garden, was now a graveyard waiting to open. Men felt it too. Those who had not bowed to the watchers began to whisper again the old prayers, the ones spoken before the cities rose, before the angels fell. They remembered Eden, the days of walking in peace, the covenant of breath and soil, and their tears joined the earth's lament. The watchers, bound in their prisons, could only listen. From beneath mountains and deserts, they heard the groan of the world. The chains that held them were forged not only in divine will, but in grief. The sorrow of the earth echoed through stone and silence. They knew then that their fall had infected more than man, it had scarred creation itself. And the giants, they heard it too. Oya awoke one night in a city of marble. The fountains had stopped. The wind no longer sang through the arches. He stood atop a tower, once proud, and saw that the horizon no longer shimmered. It simply waited. And in the waiting, he heard the cry. It was not loud. It was deeper than sound. It pulled at the bones. He fell to his knees. The Book of Giants speaks of this strange moment, of giants who began to disappear, not by blade or flood, but by grief. They wandered into deserts. They sat beside dead rivers. Some screamed at the sky, begging for their fathers to save them. Others sank into silence, staring at the stars that no longer seemed to care. One line survives. They were no longer feared. They were forgotten. The earth had turned her face away. Tonight, as you lie still beneath your blanket of breath, know this: the world is not mute. It remembers. It mourns. And when sorrow fills its lungs, even giants tremble. But you are not alone. The cry that shook the earth also stirred heaven. And in the soft soil of a quiet valley, a child named Noah begins to grow. Let your body rest now. Let the weight of this chapter fall gently across your shoulders. The winds have not yet risen. The rain has not yet come. But the cry has been heard. And in the hearing, a door begins to open. He was born into a world breaking beneath its own weight. Noah's first breath was taken not in peace, but in the long, weary shadow of divine silence. His eyes opened to a land groaning, where the grass no longer grew in joy and the rivers no longer laughed. The sun, once golden, seemed weary in the sky. And yet, as he opened his tiny mouth to cry, the wind paused, if only for a moment. He was not like other children. His skin bore a glow not seen since the days of Eden. His eyes, pale and deep, held the reflection of things beyond this world. His voice soothed even the animals. It is written that when he laughed for the first time, the trees shivered, and the hills echoed softly in return. Lamech, his father, was afraid. He had not known a child could look like this, so luminous, so still, so other. Suspicion crept into his thoughts. Had the watchers touched his household? Had his wife been deceived by a being cloaked in light? He brought his concern to Methuselah, the elder of elders. Methuselah, sensing the gravity of the moment, did not answer, but prayed. And that night, Enoch appeared to him, in a dream brighter than waking. The old prophet stood beside a river of fire. He spoke no words at first, only smiled a soft, knowing smile, like one who has waited a long time to deliver comfort. This child, Enoch finally said, is not born of fallen blood. He is the balm for the wound. He shall be named Noah, for through him the earth shall find rest. It was the first clear sign since the sentence was pronounced. A lifeline in the flood of judgment, a whisper in the whirlwind. Noah grew quickly. His hands, though gentle, were strong. His heart was slow to anger, quick to listen. He spent his days in the fields, tending to the earth that still responded to his presence. The animals came near to him, not in fear, but as to an old friend. And in the quiet of the evenings, he would sit beside the trees and hum songs that had no name, melodies carried down from a time before time. But around him, the world continued to fracture. The giants warred. They tore apart the very cities they had once built. Brother turned against brother. The great monuments cracked. The stone gods lost their faces. The people fled, but found no shelter. There were rumors of fire falling from the skies, strange stars that moved and vanished, and everywhere the earth trembled beneath footsteps far too large. Yet Noah stood firm. He did not hide. He did not raise walls. He prayed. He watched. He waited. And one morning, beneath a sky pale with waiting, a voice came. It was not the voice of a man, nor of an angel. It was the same voice that had shaped the stars and breathed into dust. And it spoke to Noah as to a friend. The end of all flesh has come before me. Noah fell to the ground, not in terror, but in awe. Make for yourself an ark, said the voice, of gopher wood. With rooms you shall make it, and you shall cover it with pitch, inside and out. For behold, I am bringing a flood of waters upon the earth, to destroy all flesh in which is the breath of life. But then the voice softened. But with you I will establish my covenant. In that moment, the flood was no longer only destruction, it was rebirth. The ark would be more than a vessel, it would be a womb, a second beginning, a path through judgment into mercy. Noah did not hesitate. He began to build. He built not in secret, but in silence. Each plank was a prayer, each nail a note in the song of salvation. He built while the world mocked him, while the giants laughed, while the cities crumbled. The Book of Giants does not speak of Noah directly, but the silence around his name is telling. As the giants turned on each other, they did not dare approach his home. Something in them, buried deep beneath violence and pride, recognized the presence of one chosen. They did not understand him, but they feared him, because Noah was not alone. He walked with the same unseen companion that had walked with Enoch. And in that companionship, he became immovable. As the ark grew, the animals began to arrive, not driven by instinct, but drawn as if by invitation. Pairs from the forests, the deserts, the high mountains, and the shadowed deeps. They came to Noah, one by one, and he welcomed them. No whip was needed, no trap. They came because they trusted. The same earth that had cried out in agony now whispered to its children, "Come, be spared." And still Noah worked. Years passed. The giants faded into madness. The watchers remained buried beneath the weight of their regret. The people scoffed until the skies darkened, until the winds shifted, until something in the air whispered a different tune. Noah, chosen not for strength, but for obedience, stood before the ark one final time. He placed his hand upon the door. It would not yet be closed. There was still time. A sliver, a breath. Tonight, let your breath slow. Let the sound of hammer and timber lull your thoughts. Let the quiet righteousness of Noah wrap around your mind like the arc of the stars. Judgment is near. Yes, but so is the ark. So is mercy. So is the covenant. You have not been forgotten. The door is not yet shut, and the rain has not yet begun to fall. Before the skies opened, before the first drop struck the dust, something else was prepared, not of wood or pitch or animal flesh, but of words, of memory, of witness. Before the ark was sealed, wisdom was written, for Enoch, though long departed, had not left the world empty-handed. The tablets came in silence, not grand pillars etched with fire, not scrolls cast from clouds, but simple slabs, stone, clay, crystal marked with lines the wind could not erase, carved not for the giants, nor for the watchers, but for those who would come after, for a people who would forget, and one day remember. These were the tablets of wisdom. Legends say that before his final ascent, Enoch was entrusted with sacred knowledge, truths older than the stars, older than Eden. He was told to preserve it, not to change judgment, but to guide what remained beyond it. What was recorded on those tablets was never meant for the proud. It was meant for the meek. The Book of Raziel, whispered of in Jewish mysticism, tells of an angel descending after the fall of man to deliver a book of divine secrets to Adam. Some say this book passed from hands to hands, from Adam to Enoch, from Enoch to Noah, hidden within the ark itself. And while the names differ and the legends twist, the root is constant. Wisdom was preserved. Not every line of the Book of Giants speaks of ruin. Some speak of awe, of visions, of a radiant figure who stood at the center of the heavens with writing like flame upon his garments. Enoch, they say, received insight into the motion of the stars, the language of the wind, the balance of justice and mercy. This wisdom was not merely academic. It was a record of the soul's shape. He wrote of cycles, how corruption leads to collapse, how silence follows pride, and how out of silence comes rebirth. He warned not only of giants and floods, but of the heart's slow forgetting. He spoke of the danger of light untethered from love, of knowledge without humility, and he wrote it down. Some of these tablets were buried. Others, legends claim, were passed to Methuselah, then to Lamech, and finally to Noah. Not all were stone. Some may have been inscribed on metal. Others burned into bark that no fire could consume. But wherever they were kept, they remained untouched by the flood. Because truth does not drown. As Noah continued his work, he was given a task beyond construction. He was to carry more than beasts and seed. He was to carry memory. He collected not only the creatures of the world, but the words of the past. Quietly, reverently, he took the tablets given by his forefathers and sealed them within the ark. The world would fall, but wisdom would float. It is said that among the final acts before the rain came, Noah stood before the tablets and wept, not for fear, but for the weight of it all. To be chosen not only to survive, but to remember, to carry what others had buried, to preserve the sacred flame through darkness, and the angels watched. One fragment from Qumran hints at this moment, a dream where a great mountain splits, revealing a chamber of glowing texts. A voice says, unquote, "These shall rest until the end of days." Another speaks of a light hidden within the darkness, a light that cannot be consumed. Zoharic mystics would later call it Or Haganuz, the hidden light, a remnant of creation's first dawn, concealed after the fall, reserved for the righteous. Many believe the tablets of wisdom shine with this same light, not outwardly, inwardly, because the greatest wisdom is not that which dazzles, but that which guides gently in the night. As the last nails were driven into the ark, as the animals settled into their places, as the sky grew heavy with anticipation, Noah sat beside the tablets and read. He did not understand every line, but he understood enough. He knew that this flood was not the end. It was the beginning of something old returning. Tonight, as your breathing deepens and your body drifts, imagine those tablets resting quietly within the dark belly of the ark. No thunder reaches them. No wave stirs them. They sleep, cradled by purpose. Their words, meant for the future, for us still speak in whispers. Let your heart be quiet now. You, too, are a vessel. You, too, carry memory. The waters are rising. But the light is not lost. They came not as kings, but as executioners of justice. The archangels, Raphael, Uriel, Michael, and Gabriel descended from the heights, not with rage, but with purpose. Their radiance did not burn it exposed. Their wings did not stir the earth, they revealed its trembling. Where they walked, shadows vanished. Where they gazed, all things were seen. And they had been sent to bind what had broken the world. The sentence had been written. Now, it would be carried out. Dudail, the name lingers like a scar in the air. It was a place few dared name aloud, a forgotten land where the sun barely touched the stone, where the earth was jagged and bitter, and silence hung heavy like smoke. It was not made for life. It was made for chains. It is written in the Book of Enoch that this was the pit, the prison where Azazel would be cast. Azazel, the great corrupter, the angel who had taught mankind the art of war, the beautifying of the eyelids, the crafting of charms and sorcery, the teacher of blades, the whisperer of pride. His name echoed in every ruin. His influence clung to every broken oath. Now, he would fall. The ground split open with a sound no man could hear, and Raphael came like a comet from the firmament, clothed in judgment. Azazel saw him and screamed not in terror, but in rage. He tried to rise, his wings ignited, but heaven had already weighed him. Raphael seized him. There was no battle, no struggle, just the stillness of inevitability, with chains forged in fire before time began. Raphael bound Azazel hand and foot. He was thrown into a crevice deeper than light, into the hollow bones of the earth, and over him was placed rough, jagged stone. The mouth of the pit was sealed, and above it mountains were drawn like a curtain. There he would wait, until the final day. The Book of Giants hints at this terror, though it names not the binding directly. Instead, it speaks of silence falling over the corrupted lands, of the giants growing restless, their dreams turning black. They felt the shift. As Azazel fell, their strength began to wane. The other watchers watched from afar, once luminous and fierce, now broken and bowed. One by one, they too were gathered. Shemihazah, Kokabeel, Ramiel, Tamiel. Each was taken by a different angel, carried to places unknown, buried beneath sand, stone, sea, or mountain. They would not die. They would not speak. They would be held, not in wrath, in witness. For their punishment was not simply to fall, it was to remain, to remember. Above ground, the giants grew frantic. Their fathers had vanished. Their power no longer responded to their will. The earth, once pliable beneath their feet, resisted them. The animals fled at their approach. The storms no longer obeyed their cries. Their temples began to crack. Their monuments crumbled, and their dreams turned darker still. Maweh dreamed of a throne in the clouds being torn apart by wind. Oya saw a sea of fire swallowing all names. Haya dreamed of a book closing its cover black and smooth, and the sound of chains echoing from its pages. These dreams were not visions. They were farewells. Enoch, far from them now, remained silent. He had delivered the sentence. He had returned to the heights. He had finished his writing. But his absence was louder than any prophecy. The world was tilting. The watchers were bound. The giants were unraveling. And Dudail lay still. Tonight, as you listen in the dark, imagine the quiet under those jagged rocks. Beneath the dust, beneath the fireless flames. The watchers wait, not plotting, not dreaming, just waiting until the rivers run backward, until the stars are judged, until the books are opened once more. But for now, they sleep beneath the earth. And you are above. You are still in the light. Let your breath steady. Let your heartbeat slow. The chains are not yours. The pit is not your end. You are carried on different wings, wings of mercy, of memory, of hope. The flood is near, but so is the promise. And beyond the judgment, something holy still waits to rise. There comes a moment before every storm when the world forgets to move. Not a breeze stirs, not a leaf dares fall. The birds vanish. The sky, heavy with waiting, holds its breath, and the soul, though it cannot name it, feels the silence settle like a veil. In that hush, deeper than any word, something ancient draws near. This was the stillness before the flood. The giants, once roaring across plains and mountaintops, had begun to vanish, not in fire, not in battle, but in absence. Their voices no longer cracked the heavens. Their footprints faded in the dust. Some wandered into the deserts and were never seen again. Others stared into the sky as if waiting for something they could not name. The watchers were bound. The prophets had fallen silent. Even the animals, once drawn to Noah's presence like streams to a river, had entered the ark 2 by 2 and settled into quiet. No more trumpets, no cries, only breath, only stillness. Noah stood before the door. The ark was complete, every beam fastened, every room filled. The tablets of wisdom had been sealed inside, wrapped in linen, guarded by prayer. He had done all that was asked. And now, he waited. Days passed. The people outside mocked him still, though their jeering had grown uneasy. Their laughter echoed a little too loudly, their eyes flickering to the clouds a little too often. Some dared approach the ark, not to board it, but to peer inside, finding no throne, no shrine, no spectacular. They scoffed and walked away. But the wind no longer answered them. They were speaking into silence. From the scrolls of Enoch to the fragments of the Book of Giants, this moment is barely recorded. Not because it was unimportant, but because it was too heavy for words. It was a pause written into the music of time, a sacred hush, the kind that makes even angels stop their wings. In this silence, the final dreams came. Oya, the last of the giants to speak, saw himself beneath an empty sky. No stars, no moon, just vastness. He walked until the ground crumbled beneath him. And in his fall, he did not cry out. He only closed his eyes. And when he awoke, he said nothing. For the first time in his long life, Oya wept. He knelt upon a stone ridge as the winds grew still and watched the horizon dim. His brother was gone, his father bound, his world hollowed, and in the quiet, he whispered a single word, barely audible, "Forgive." No answer came, and yet, perhaps that was the answer, for in silence, the heart is laid bare. In the pause, the truth rises. Back in the ark, Noah stood with his hand upon the doorway. His family waited behind him. The animals lay in peace. The lamps flickered gently in the dim interior. But Noah did not move. He listened. And then, on the seventh day, the wind shifted. Not a storm, not yet, just a breath. But it was enough. For that breath carried with it the memory of Eden, the echo of promises made before the foundations of the earth. It carried the voice of the one who speaks in silence. And Noah knew it was time. He turned. He looked once more upon the land he had known all his life, upon the hills and trees and faces that had turned from mercy. And though his eyes brimmed with tears, his hand did not tremble. He closed the door. The sound was not loud. It did not shake the mountains. It did not cause the rivers to leap. But heaven heard it. Earth felt it. And history, as it had been, ended outside. The world was still. No clouds, no thunder, just silence. But beneath the soil, the fountain stirred, and high above, the sky began to split. Let your breath match this moment. Feel the hush before the water. Let the quiet wrap around your soul like the folds of Noah's robe. The storm will come, but for now, there is only the great silence. Sacred, soft, whole. You are inside the ark. You are not alone. Sleep now. Dream of rain yet to fall. It began with a drop, one single tear of heaven, falling upon the cracked and waiting dust. A sound so soft it might have been mistaken for memory. But then came another, and another, and another, and the sky opened. Not in rage, not in fury, but in release. The heavens, silent for generations, now wept. The firmament once divided to protect was drawn back. The great canopy split, and the waters above the sky returned to the earth. It did not begin with thunder. The storm crept in gently, as if even judgment had learned patience. A grey veil spread across the heavens. Winds curled low across the grass. Trees bowed without rustling. The very air seemed to bend beneath the weight of what was coming. And beneath the earth forgotten, buried, ancient, the fountains of the deep began to awaken. The Book of Enoch tells of these fountains sealed since the beginning, buried beneath layers of stone and silence. But when the decree came forth, even the stone obeyed. Cracks spread across the hillsides. Valleys groaned, and from below, water surged. Not rain alone. Arising, in the ark, Noah stood quietly. He did not rush. He did not speak. His hands rested on the wood he had shaped with prayer and patience. Around him, the animals stirred, not in fear, but in knowing. The silence of the last 7 days had prepared them. They understood more than men. Outside, the first rivers began to swell. The people ran to higher ground. They knocked upon the sealed ark, calling Noah's name not in jest, but in desperation. But the door, sealed by the hand of the Most High, would not open, not for strength, not for tears, because mercy has a season, and its season had passed. The giants saw it. 2. Oya, once the loudest, now stood alone upon a shattered temple, staring upward. His breath was slow. His eyes no longer burned. He did not try to run. He did not roar. He simply watched as the waters crept over the fields he once ruled. He saw the earth refuse his strength. The soil, once soft beneath his feet, now turned to mire. His hands, once capable of lifting boulders, now sank into the flood with no resistance. He cried out once, not for himself, but for all that had been lost. The Book of Giants falls silent after this. The fragments end here, at the edge of the wave, but silence speaks. The waters did not crash, they climbed. Slowly, relentlessly, each inch claimed was an erasure. Of cities, of altars, of names. Noah, watching through the narrow window of the ark, saw nothing but mist. He heard nothing but rain. But within him, the covenant pulsed. He was not chosen to escape. he was chosen to carry, and carry he would. Inside the ark, the air remained calm. The light was soft. The animals lay close together, old rivals resting cheek to cheek. The very atmosphere was different, like the space between heartbeat and breath. Outside, mountains became islands, then vanished. The people cried out to the hills. The hills were no longer there. The giants tried to swim, but even their strength could not match the pull of judgment. The waters knew no kings. The flood recognized no thrones. Even the skies darkened further, until time itself seemed lost. There was only rising, and in that rising, cleansing. This was not vengeance. This was sorrow shaped into water, a grief that had waited long enough. Let your breath match the rhythm of the rain. Let the soft thunder in the distance mirror the echoes of your own longing. You are in the ark now, not of wood, but of peace. The storm rages outside, but within, you are held. The waters rise. Yes, but so does hope. For even now, beneath the flood, seeds are sleeping, and light, though hidden, is never gone. Rest now. The world is being rewritten. The rain did not stop with a thunderclap. It faded, softly, slowly, like a lullaby reaching its final note. What had once fallen in torrents now became a mist, and that mist became silence. The sky, exhausted from weeping, held back its final tears, and beneath it, the earth exhaled, emptied, soaked, stripped clean. Everything was gone, not just the cities of stone and blood, not just the towers of the giants or the roads carved by their hands. The sounds were gone, the markets, the songs, the laughter twisted into madness. All that had clung to rebellion had been carried away on the tide. What remained was stillness. Above that stillness, the ark floated. It did not glide. It did not rush. It rested, a cradle atop chaos. It moved only when the waters moved. It swayed with the rhythm of rebirth. Inside, all was dim and warm. There were no windows to the sea below, only a small opening above, through which Noah breathed and waited. He did not speak often. His prayers were quiet. There was no land in sight, only horizon. Time passed differently in that floating womb. Days bled into weeks. The sun would rise behind veils of cloud, then disappear again. The animals stirred, but they did not fight. The world inside the ark obeyed a peace deeper than instinct. Even the lions lay still. The Book of Enoch tells us that during the flood, the spirits of the giants, the Nephilim, did not rise. Their bodies fell, but their spirits wandered, bound to the earth, rootless, restless, cursed to walk without form. These would become the spirits that haunted ancient tales, the murmurers in the dark corners of the world. The unclean, the forgotten, judgment had claimed their flesh, but not their memory. One cannot read the Book of Giants without sensing it, this eerie absence that follows the fall, the silence of power lost. The last line of some fragments speak of visions of books closed, of names erased from stones. There are no goodbyes, no resistance, just vanishing. And yet, not all vanished. The ark held more than animals. It held stories, wrapped in cloth, hidden in oil jars, scratched into stone, passed from Lamech to Noah, from Methuselah through dream to hand. The wisdom of Enoch remained. The visions, the warnings, the covenant, the old light, sealed away. It would not return immediately. First, the world had to breathe. The waters, though vast, had begun to retreat. not in rushing rivers, but in whispers. The mountains slowly began to reveal their crowns. Valleys, once drowned, lifted their heads like sleepers, returning from long sorrow. One morning, the ark struck something solid. Ararat, a resting place. Noah waited. 40 days passed. He sent forth a raven, then a dove, then another. When the final dove returned with a single olive leaf clutched in its beak, Noah wept, not loudly, not in triumph, but as one who had carried the world's last breath across an ocean of silence. The door opened, and the animals stepped out not in panic, but with quiet reverence. Their paws touched dry land as if it were holy. The trees had not yet grown. The grasses were newborn. But it was enough. The covenant was ready. Noah, standing beneath a pale sun, built an altar of stone. He lit a fire not to consume, but to remember, and the smoke rose like prayer, curling upward, spiraling into heaven and the Most High, smelling the scent of mercy, made a promise. Never again. Not like this. A rainbow stretched across the sky, a bow turned backward, a weapon set to rest. And in that arc of color, heaven signed its vow. That judgment would never again wash away the world without redemption beside it. Tonight, as your breathing slows and your thoughts begin to soften, remember this: the storm always ends. The waves do not last forever. Even the giants fell. Even the watchers were bound. But what endured was peace. The aftermath was not barren. It was sacred. And from the stillness, a new story would begin. Let yourself rest in that stillness. You are not in the flood. You are on the mountain. And morning is near. The waters had receded. The earth was quiet again, not because it had returned to what it was, but because it was beginning anew. The great noise of the Nephilim had been silenced. The cities they carved into mountains. The temples built to honor forbidden fathers. The echoes of footsteps too heavy for soil, all of it now lay beneath layers of silt and time. Judgment had not erased the past. It had buried it, and there it waited. For centuries, the flood's aftermath spoke not in thunder, but in forgetting. The world moved on. Generations passed. Trees grew over bones. Grasses spread across shattered stone. Even memory, once passed in song and story, grew thin. But the earth never forgets. Far from the mountains of Ararat, in a land dry and wind-swept, a cave yawned beneath the surface. It held no light, no voice, only jars sealed with ancient hands. The jars held scrolls, and among them, torn and faded, were fragments that once belonged to a forgotten book. A book of sorrow, a book of dreams, the book of giants. It would not be found for thousands of years, hidden in Qumran. In the caves above the Dead Sea, it slept through empire and exile, through crusade and crown, until one day in 1947, a shepherd tossed a stone into the dark and cracked open the silence. Out spilled memory. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls, texts of law and prophecy, of community and covenant, were fragments of something older, something not spoken in churches or read in synagogues. Something banned, suppressed, preserved only in whispers. The children of the Watchers, the Nephilim, their names, thought erased, still clung to faded ink. Mawe, Oya, Haya, and among their stories scattered, incomplete were visions of their fall, their fear, their fading. What struck the scholars was not their power, but their grief. They had ruled, yes, they had destroyed. But in the end, they had dreamed of drowning. And in those dreams, they turned to Enoch. They asked not to be saved, but to be remembered. It was not mercy they sought. It was a marker, a line in the dust that said, "We were here." And Enoch, faithful scribe, had written it. But even his writings had been buried. The early church, striving to shape a canon, declared such stories dangerous. Irenaeus called them heresy. Athanasius, in his festal letter of 367 AD, named the acceptable books and condemned the rest. Among the condemned, the Book of Enoch, and with it, the Book of Giants. The texts were hidden. Some were burned, others buried by faithful hands who believed they were preserving light for a time yet to come. Time passed. The names faded, but the dust held fast. And then, the desert gave them back. The fragments were small parchment torn by age and sand. But they spoke of watchers who once wept, of giants who feared the flood, of visions and dreams too heavy for flesh. They spoke of Enoch, who walked between stars and soil, and they whispered of a world where even judgment carried tenderness. Buried in the dust, these stories rose again, not with fire, with breath, with wonder, with you. Tonight, as you lie still beneath the hush of your room, know this: you are part of the remembering. The giants feared erasure. The watchers mourned their silence. But someone opened the jar. Someone read the name. And now, you know. Close your eyes. Let the dust of forgotten books settle gently on your chest. Let the memory of the flood roll past like distant thunder. You are not drowning. You are not buried. You are awake. And the stories walk with you. What was hidden has been found. And you are listening. Truth, when too bright, becomes dangerous. It does not scream. It lingers quietly, stubbornly between the lines of what is allowed and what is feared. And sometimes, those in power do not destroy truth because it is false, but because it is inconvenient, because it remembers what others would rather forget. So it was with the Book of Giants. After the flood, after Babel, after the rise and fall of ancient kingdoms, the world shifted again. The scrolls were not yet gone. In scattered places, hidden by the faithful and the curious, the stories endured, passed from hand to hand, whispered in corners of the ancient world. The tale of the watchers and their children still stirred the embers of memory. And in those early centuries after Christ, when the church was young and the canon of scripture still taking shape, these stories resurfaced, not in shadow, but in serious discourse. Some believed they were sacred. Others saw only danger. The Book of Enoch, which once held a place of reverence in communities across Judea and Ethiopia, had not yet been condemned. It was read aloud in assemblies. Its words were known. Even the Apostle Jude, in what would later become part of the New Testament, quoted Enoch directly. "Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his holy ones." But something changed. As the church grew in influence, as bishops gathered and creeds were written, there came a pressure subtle at first, then severe, to define authority. And authority could not leave room for stories of angels who fell in desire, of giants who defied heaven, of a prophet who walked with God beyond death. Too strange, too wild, too Gnostic. By the late 2nd century, a voice rose from Gaul. Irenaeus, bishop and defender of the emerging orthodoxy, declared war on heresy In his work against heresies, he warned against secret knowledge, against those who clung to what he called vain myths and genealogies. In his words, texts like Enoch's were cast into suspicion. Soon after, the Muratorian fragment, one of the oldest known lists of canonical books, named the Apocalypse of Peter, another apocryphal text, as acceptable only for private reading. Even that small allowance would vanish. Then, in 362 AD, came the decree that would reshape history. Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, issued his festal letter, a proclamation listing the 27 books that would become the New Testament. He did not whisper. He spoke clearly. Let no one add to them. Let no one take away from them. And in the same breath, he condemned all others. The Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, the Apocalypse of Peter, the Gospel of Thomas, the Book of Giants, not just rejected, banned. To own them was to defy the church. To read them was to risk excommunication. And so, the burying began, not just of texts, but of memory. The scrolls were hidden in jars and caves. The codices were locked in desert monasteries. Some were burned, others disintegrated in time's relentless hands. The people forgot. The giants, who once shook the earth, were reduced to myth. The watchers became symbols. And Enoch, the man who had stood between heaven and flood, was left to wander the edges of legend, but not everywhere. In Ethiopia, far from the Roman councils, the Book of Enoch remained. It was preserved, read, and cherished. And there, in the highlands and valleys, the truth kept breathing. For truth, when buried, does not die. It sleeps and waits. Centuries passed, empires fell, and in 1945, near Nag Hammadi in Egypt, a clay jar was unearthed by a farmer. Inside, Gnostic Gospels and forbidden scriptures. The wind shifted. In 1947, in Qumran, a boy chasing a goat cracked open a cave. The Dead Sea Scrolls emerged. Among them, fragments of the Book of Giants. The ban had failed. You, now listening in the hush of this night, are the proof. You are hearing what emperors feared, what councils silenced, what desert winds preserved. The church fathers were not evil. They sought order. But in seeking order, they sealed away the wildness of early memory, the mystery, the awe, the great tension between justice and mercy, between rebellion and redemption. And now, these stories return, not to undo, but to remind. Let your breathing soften. Let the shadows of forgotten texts swirl gently around you. The voices of the watchers, the cries of the giants, the tears of Enoch. They are not heresy, they are history. And you, blessed sleeper, are a keeper of that memory. What was banned has been found, and the next chapter waits. The desert remembers. Long after kings are forgotten and cathedrals fall into ruin, the dry places keep their secrets. They do not forget. They do not speak, but they wait quiet, patient, unyielding, and sometimes, when the time is right, they open. In the winter of 1945, in a village called Nag Hammadi, a farmer named Muhammad Ali al-Saman was digging for fertilizer in the soft clay outside his town. His shovel struck something hard. Curious, he dug deeper. There, beneath the soil, he uncovered a sealed jar, tall, narrow, ancient, Inside it were books, 13 leather-bound codices wrapped in parchment, hidden for over 500 years. Their pages were brittle, written in Coptic. The texts were strange, forgotten gospels, mystical dialogues, visions of heaven and whispers of divine sparks. These were not stories of laws and temples. They were stories of inner light, of cosmic balance, of divine memory. They were Gnostic. Among them, the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Philip, the Apocalypse of Adam, and the Gospel of Truth. And the Church had once buried them. They were likely hidden by monks of the early Christian era, perhaps in fear, perhaps in defiance, after Athanasius's 367 decree that banned all non-canonical texts. They had been sealed not in defiance of faith, but in protection of it. For the monks knew what we now know. Truth cannot be destroyed, only hidden. 2 years later, in 1947, another boy, this one, a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad Dib, wandered the cliffs above the Dead Sea in search of a lost goat. As he tossed a stone into a dark cave, he heard something break. Inside, he found jars. And inside the jars, more scrolls, ancient Hebrew and Aramaic texts. Dozens of them, preserved by a Jewish sect, likely the Essenes, and untouched since before the fall of Jerusalem. These would become known as the Dead Sea Scrolls, arguably the greatest archaeological discovery of the 20th century. Among them were familiar names, Isaiah, Psalms, Deuteronomy, but hidden within the fragments was something else. A whisper of giants, a tale of dreams and downfall. The Book of Giants. Though damaged and incomplete, the fragments were unmistakable. Names long buried Maweh, Oya, Hahya emerged from the dust. Visions of trees uprooted, of heavenly tablets, of giants pleading through dreams. Pieces of Enoch's world, scattered but breathing. Scholars were stunned. For centuries, the Book of Enoch and its companions had been known only through Ethiopic translations and faint echoes in apocryphal texts. Now, in the dry silence of Qumran, the scrolls gave confirmation. The stories had not been inventions. They had been remnants, and they had returned. What had been banned by bishops, condemned by councils, and forgotten by centuries had re-emerged. Not from libraries, but from the earth itself. Why? Perhaps because the world was ready. In an age of war, of machinery and metal, of questions no creed could answer. The silence broke. The buried books came forth, not to replace scripture, not to challenge the sacred, but to remind us the early world was wider than we remember. Stranger, more luminous, more human. The giants had fallen. The watchers were bound, but their memory had not drowned. It had waited beneath rock and sand and ash, waiting for the moment a farmer or a shepherd would unknowingly open the door. And you, dear listener, are part of that opening. You are reading the words they tried to erase. You are dreaming the dreams of those who once feared forgetting. The Book of Giants is not complete. It never will be. Its pages are fragmented, its meanings uncertain, but perhaps that is its gift, because broken memory speaks more truly than polished myth. And what was hidden has more power than what was merely repeated. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavy, know this: you live in a time the giants never imagined. You remember what the flood could not wash away. You have heard what the bishops once silenced. And though the scrolls lie in museums and archives, their truest resting place is in you. You carry them forward. Let your breath slow now. Let the dust of the desert settle around your thoughts. The caves are open. The jars are broken. The words walk again. And the story, the flood passed. The giants fell. The watchers were bound. The scrolls were buried. And the world was made new, but not empty. For even after the rain ceased, after the ark came to rest upon the mountain's shoulder, something remained, not in the soil, nor in the stone, but in the breath of those who survived. Something unseen, quiet, holy, light, not the light of the sun, nor the blaze of fire, but the light that lingers in memory, the light that rests behind the eyes of those who remember when all else is forgotten. Enoch had seen that light. He had carried it, written it, hidden it in tablets and caves and human hearts. And though his body was gone, that light, his message, his visions, his warnings never vanished. It waited in the dreams of prophets and the whisperings of wind. It waited for rediscovery. The Book of Giants, though torn and incomplete, carries the trace of that light. It does not glow with answers. It trembles with questions, with longing, with grief. But grief is a kind of light, too, the kind that shows us what was once beautiful, the kind that makes memory sacred. After the flood, Noah stepped out into silence. No cities, no voices, no footsteps but his own. And yet, the light was there, in the rainbow that split the sky like a vow, in the soft ground beneath his feet, in the animals breathing beside him, in the tablets of wisdom wrapped in linen within the ark, in the covenant carved not into stone, but into time itself. The Nephilim were gone. Their names, once etched into the sides of mountains, now survived only in crumbling ink and brittle scrolls. Their power had been vast, their hunger greater still, but their end had come not with that. They were not gods. They were lost, children of light who fell into shadow. And yet, even they were remembered. That, too, is light. For what is remembrance if not a flame in the darkness? What is forgiveness if not the returning of warmth to a world gone cold? You have walked through their story now, from the descent of the watchers, to the rise of their children, to the weeping of angels, to the building of the ark, to the silence that washed away a broken world. And now, at the end, you stand in the morning. The light that remains is not loud. It hums in the silence. It flickers in the soul. It waits for those who listen. Tonight, you have listened. You have joined a long line of watchers, not angels, not giants, but those who watch for what others forget. Those who feel the echo in the bones of old stories. Those who carry forbidden fire, not to destroy but to remember. Let this light rest in you now. Let it glow in your chest as you drift into stillness. The rain has stopped. The mountains rise. The books are open. And though the giants sleep, the light remains. You are not alone. You have been chosen to remember. Close your eyes. Rest. Keeper of stories, good night. And now, the story rests. The flood has passed. The ark has landed. The scrolls have been sealed in silence. And you are still here. What you have heard tonight is not just the tale of giants and angels, of floods and judgment. It is the story of memory, of mercy, of a world that fell, and a light that refused to go out. The Book of Giants is not complete. Its pages are scattered, its lines faded by wind and time. But what remains is more than enough. It reminds us that even the most powerful beings feared to be forgotten, that even the monstrous dreamed of redemption, and that one man, Enoch, chose to remember when others turned away. He wrote, not for glory, but for hope, and hope survives, even buried beneath centuries of silence, beneath church decrees and desert dust, even beneath the waters of the flood. Hope endured. It endured in the dreams of the Nephilim, in the tablets carried inside the ark, in the scrolls tucked away in a cave. And tonight, it endures in you, because you listened, because you remembered. And now, as your breath slows and your limbs grow heavy, let the echoes of this story wrap around you like a soft blanket. Let the names fade gently across your mind. Ohia, Mawe, Enoch, Noah. Let their fear become your courage. Let their silence become your stillness. Let their sorrow become your peace. The world may forget, but the soul remembers. So rest now, keeper of the hidden books. Close your eyes. Sink into the warmth of divine remembering. You are not lost. You are not judged. You are held beneath the stars that once watched giants fall and prophets rise. You now sleep, and as you sleep, the light that remains will guard you. Until morning, good night.